shadows in the rain. In the jazz bar, silence fell as the old man leaned back, nursing his bourbon. The crowd waited, anticipation heavy in the air. He smirked, feeling their stares, and took his time lighting another cigarette, letting the memories stir. "All right then," he murmured, voice rough as gravel, "settle in. This one's a long story. Ever heard of Operation Twilight?" His eyes scanned the room, gauging reactions, but no one answered. Satisfied, he continued. "See Los Angeles in 7-3... different world. Whole city was a hotbed of secrets, cover-ups, double-crosses. A lot of players, each with their own agenda, and I was one of them. Didn't have much of a choice, really. Came from a life that didn't leave many options. When a man named Mason recruited me, he called it a way out. A chance to be someone important." The bartender nodded, refilling the old man's glass without a word. The patrons leaned closer, captivated by the words of this stranger who felt like he belonged in an old noir movie. "So there I was," he continued, voice barely more than a whisper, midnight at the edge of the LA. Docks, waiting on my next contact. I was supposed to receive a dossier. A routine job, one that didn't need questions. But when I arrived, the contact, a man named Taylor, was lying on the ground, dead as they come. With that damn calling card, I mentioned a lipstick stain on a crumpled napkin. He paused, letting that image settle. "Now, in my line of work, you don't stick around when something's gone wrong. But then ... I recognized the mark. Lena's mark. You don't just ignore that. So I waited, scanning the dark corners, half hoping she'd show herself." A sigh escaped his lips as he looked toward the window, seeing something only he could. Lena Darrow. The woman had more aliases than I had regrets. Born for espionage, I'd say. And if she was leaving messages like that, it meant two things: trouble and ... more trouble. I'd known her long enough to learn that Lena didn't walk away from anything unless she left something or someone in her place. The bartender raised an eyebrow, but the old man just chuckled, raising his glass. "The thing about Lena was ... she always found you. 3 nights later, I'm at a safe house across town, pacing the floors. When, just like that, she's there. She doesn't knock. Lena didn't believe in such formalities. She's drenched from the rain, hair dripping. A fire in her eyes that could have set the whole room alight. Before I can get a word in, she's in my face, talking about something she calls the Orpheus file. Said it was the key to power, something no government official should hold." The man leaned in, voice lowering to a near whisper. I knew better than to ask too much, but I got enough out of her to realize we weren't talking about an ordinary file. The Orpheus file held names of high-profile defectors, traitors, and spies, people who'd gone off the grid or worse. It was a hit list, one that could make or break regimes. And Lena had it. The old man leaned back, letting out a sigh. "It should have ended there. I should have handed her over to the people who paid me, let them deal with it. But Lena had a way of making you think you were the only thing standing between her and the edge of the world. Before I knew it, I'd agreed to help her." He paused, running a hand through his graying hair. "The plan was simple, or so she said. We were going to meet her buyer, a man named Solomon, who ran a shadow network called the Wraiths. They weren't government, weren't corporate, they were something in between. A new breed of power broker. Lena insisted Solomon was the only one who could keep the Orpheus file safe. But ... well, trust in our line of work is as valuable as it is rare." The old man looked around the room, a bitter smile playing at his lips. "We arranged the meet for the following night. Somewhere I'd scouted myself a warehouse, isolated and hidden under the city's underbelly. If things went wrong, no one would notice." He took a drag from his cigarette, shaking his head. "When I got there, Lena was already waiting, pacing. She looked almost nervous. I'd never seen her like that. She'd been my guide through this world, always one step ahead, and now here she was, glancing over her shoulder." A moment passed, the tension in the bar rising. So we're standing there, waiting, and that's when we hear the car's 3 black sedans pulling up, headlights slicing through the darkness. Lena's face paled, and she muttered one word: "Run." His eyes narrowed, as if reliving the chase. We bolted, cutting through side alleys, ducking through abandoned buildings. I could hear footsteps behind us, boots pounding against the asphalt. We split up. At one point I thought maybe she'd gotten away. But then, just as I'm catching my breath, a figure emerges from the shadows. It was Solomon. He paused, remembering the man's face, sharp as a knife. Solomon wasn't alone. He had his men, a dozen of them, each with a gun trained on me. And he didn't seem all that surprised to see me alone. The old man glanced at the bartender. You ever see someone that calm with that much power? He didn't even raise his voice. He just looked at me and said, "The file now." The bartender swallowed, as if feeling the weight of that moment. I didn't know what to do. Lena was nowhere in sight, and I was out of options. I handed over the briefcase, and Solomon took it with his small, cold smile. Then, just as I thought he was going to walk away, he turned back. He leaned in close, said, "You're free to go, but if I were you, I'd disappear for good." The old man looked down, the weight of those words pressing on him. I took his advice. I laid low, moved across the country, kept a low profile. For months, I thought maybe I'd lost her, that Lena had disappeared into the shadows. But one night, as I'm sitting in a bar just like this, she walks in, calm as can be. He paused, chuckling softly. I asked her how she found me, and she just smiled, said, "A ghost never leaves you alone." That was Lena. And that's how I ended up here, a ghost myself, telling stories to strangers in a jazz bar, wondering if maybe, just maybe, she's still out there somewhere, one step ahead, playing her own game. The patrons sat in silence, spellbound by the story. And that, my friends, is the story of Shadows in the Rain. It's about those of us who walk in darkness, those who make choices we can't take back. Lena once told me, you don't have to be good in this world, just better than the people after you, and maybe she was right. With that, he finished his bourbon, set the empty glass on the bar, and stood. He gave a final nod to the crowd, his silhouette framed by the neon glow from the street as he disappeared into the night, leaving behind only a faint trace of smoke and secrets.